Hi folks, RJ here. I want to describe some of the issues with the Lee Loadmaster Priming System that I have observed over the last couple weeks. One of the first things that I've encountered in going through and setting this press up is an observation that radially the primer press pin, the pin that presses the primer in, is radially located too far outward from the center line of the press. And I'm going to show you a couple video clips to try to graphically demonstrate what I think is part of the problem here. So I have a shell that is indexed into station number 2 on the press, and this is where you would expect the shell to normally be positioned after it's indexed to this position. And I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to raise or push down on the priming lever that should push, that would push the priming pin upwards. And it can go high enough to start to try to enter into the shell. I don't have any primers on the primer feed trough at this moment, so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So when I press this pin down, watch what happens. You can see it kind of grab the shell, and then when the pin does enter into the primer pocket of the shell, it actually pushes the shell casing outward on the press. And I'll stick a tool down there and try to pull it back as best as I can, and it really doesn't want to come back. This is where it wants to be positioned when the pin is in the base of the shell or in the base of the casing. Notice how far the shell has moved away from the center line of the press. It just is not in the proper position. So if I jiggle this around, that's pretty much where it wants to be. If I push it back and push it back down on the lever actuator, you'll see it moves back out. This is one of the problems I think that this press has. Now let me go ahead and take the shell out carefully, and we'll see what happens when the press is raised. When I raise the ram, let's bring it on up here, get a little better indication of what's going on, and adjust the camera a little bit here. When we reach the top, note where the primer pin is. Not exactly in the position I would expect. And even if I try to pull it over, I can only pull it over a little bit. The reason it doesn't pull over any further than this is that the position of the primer pin is largely influenced by the primer trough. The primer trough really is the component that essentially locates where the primer pin is relative to the shell plate. So let's try something else. I'm going to lower this back down, allow it to index. Now I'm going to feed a primer into the trough, bring it back up, and very slowly, and we'll watch a primer get slid onto the primer pin. Now, it's kind of hard to tell, but my observations have been that by and large, the primer itself is placed closer to the center line of the press than the pin itself is. Let's do that again. I'm going to go ahead, look closely, look where the primer is. I'm going to pop it off really fast, and look where the pin is. Let's do that again. Take it down, index, bring it up slowly. Very nice smooth movement. And I'm going to hold it about right there. Notice that the primer appears to be much better centered than the pin itself. Now it's going to be harder for me to get this primer off, but if you look there, it looks like the primer is going to go in about where it should. And again, I'm going to raise it all the way to the top. Keep a close eye on the primer. I'm going to very carefully remove it very quickly. Notice where the pin is. Further outwards. It's too far outward on the press. I believe that this results in potential misalignments. We don't have the pin centered where it should be, first of all. And because of that, The pin is also really not pushing evenly on the primer. The primer is sitting off to one side of the pin. The primer feed mechanism is placing the primer in the proper spot, but that just happens to be off center of the pin itself. So I think that this is possibly an issue with the carrier, the dimensions of the carrier. The well that holds the primer trough is probably off center by about 25 thousandths. I made a number of measurements of the primer pin, the well that the pin sits in, the primer trough. All these things indicate that the trough and the primer pin and the pin actuator are all about 25 thousandths too far outward from the center line of the press. However, Lee appears to have made up for this deficiency by ensuring that the primer itself is placed a little bit further inward, in other words, more centrally located on the press. So there you go. And I've got some further videos about the primer trough and some of the mods that I made to it as well. Have a good evening.